Okay, welcome to Magical Foundations Part 1, The Elements and Action, Alchemical Philosophy. I'm CL Severson. I made this presentation in 2018. You can go to astrovedicus.wordpress.com. That's my blog. I kind of just write about things relating to Ayurveda and Jyotish, and Tajika, it's Persian astrology. I also have a background in Hellenistic astrology, and as such, I feel like it's been a journey figuring out the way that the elements are presented and represented in various cultures, both medically, astrologically, and alchemically. There's a lot of uses for this information. It's a long presentation that we're going through, and it's lots of philosophy. A lot of these are based on the Shad Darshan, which are the kind of six forming foundational philosophies of Ayurveda. And Sankhya is the one we're really going to zoom in on, because the others are, deal with logic and ritual and atomic theory. Look, there's a lot of good stuff here, and you should definitely check out all branches of these and all forms of these philosophies. They're all valid in their own ways. I believe Sankhya is one of the most potent and is one of the ones that I use the most in astrology. Sankhya philosophy means to realize truth. It was given to us by Kapila, one of the greatest rishis or seers. So basically what it is, it's a theory of creation, and there's 24 principles to it. And we're going to be talking about kind of a cross-cultural examination of the elements. But before we get to the elements, we first have to talk about the environment or the milieu, the way that the elements fit into the grander scheme of creation. And through that, we need to look at Sankhya philosophy. So here's an image. On the left, we have Ardhanishvar, which is the Lord who is half woman. And you can see Shiva with Nandi, his bull, and being fused with the principle of the divine feminine, who is Shakti. So they fuse together, the two become one, and as such, I think this deity is a really beautiful iconographic representation of creation, because on the right side you have Shiva, on the left you have Shakti. So, Shiva in this case is kind of like the painting, or I would say the canvas of a painting, right? That's blank. It's the support element. It's the consciousness. It gives the ability for there to be a painting. And Shakti is the colors and forms and shapes and all the different manifestations of reality that is, superimposed onto the consciousness. So we have Purusha, which is the self, and Prakriti, which is the non-self, right? Because the self is the consciousness, and the things that we can observe and see and touch, and the things we come into contact with, as we'll look at as we go through the presentation, these things are illusory. But because there's this interplay of illusion and non-illusion, self and non-self, Purusha and Prakriti, God, goddess, Shiva, Shakti, yin, yang, whatever words you want to use, there's a fusion of that consciousness with the unconscious material and that unmanifested nature. So it's important, though, we're going to be primarily talking about Shakti, the feminine, the goddess, because she is what we interact with in our matrix, our perceived reality. We need to understand her very, very well, or understand Shakti. It's not really a her, because Shiva and Shakti don't have the same, well, they don't have qualities, right? Because they're unmanifested material. They're primordial. They're like the Wu Qi in Chinese thought, before it becomes the Tai Qi, which is that yin-yang symbol. You have perfect harmony and perfect balance. They're perfectly united, and as such, there is no manifested reality. They are fused. But Shakti invariably makes different forms because she wants to meet her Shiva. She wants to meet the consciousness. And there's a joy and an ecstasy, and that's kind of the tantric union that we describe. And the one thing we want to look at are the three gunas, or the three triguna, which are the primordial qualities of the goddess Shakti, or it's kind of um, her three layers that at different ratios create all manifested reality or illusory reality. So sattva, rajas, and tamas are like, 3 scoops of ice cream in a bowl you could look at, right? Like vanilla, strawberry, and chocolate, or something like that. We have to have all of them for there to be an evolution of consciousness, because that is why we take form. We take form to develop our consciousness. And that's the point of astrology, is to map, chart our, things that have happened to us, to understand and integrate, things that have happened, to understand what's happening now, or to predict what will happen, and to predict the different ratios of sattva, rajas, and tamas we can expect in our life. So these are very subtle things, and this is all very philosophical. As the beginning of the presentation is very, very heady, but as we move through the presentation, we will actually, things will become more clear. But essentially, you can break it down to this. Sattva is the quality of luminosity, purity, buoyancy, and harmony. It produces pleasure and happiness. It's the mode of lightness. And then you have tamas on the other end of the spectrum, which is darkness, dullness, inertia, stasis, and it produces stupor. And in the middle, you have the transformational axis, which is rajas, which is activity, energy, movement, and it produces pain. Basically, these 3 things are in varying ratios depending on where we are in our lives, in the individual, and in the society, and the consciousness, and on the planet, and in the universe on a cosmological scale. So anywhere you look in manifested reality, you're going to find tamas, sattva, rajas. So the main thing that we want to know, to put it simply, right, in a person, when we are inspired by, when we are called to action by inspiration, right, by joy, by lightness, right, like when I have that, things that I would do anyway, whether or not I'm paid for it, or whether or not I am asked to do it, or I'm not obligated to do it, it's the things in our personality and our consciousness that radiate out of us, like the light radiates from the sun. It's just natural and innate to us. And because it's innate, people can see it and recognize and interact with it in subtle ways. But yeah, it's anything we do in our life that is inspired, that is that comes from that divine part of ourselves. That is sattva, the mode of light or clarity or true essence. Sat meaning like truth, right? Rajas, is kind of the action that we do in order to fulfill desires, right? It's illusory action. I go to the grocery store, I buy food. These are all things that are, we think that we're doing the action, when in reality, it's just Vishnu doing these things. Vishnu going, if I go to the bank, it's just Vishnu going to Vishnu. So Vishnu permeates all things, and this is kind of a foundation for worldly action, right? And that's where most of us are at, is this middle, this sort of rajasic quality, right? Because we're more action oriented. People in the world doing actions are more rajasic. Spiritual leaders, people meditators, that's more sattvic. They want to be in the subtler, less manifested plane, right? And then you have the last one, tamas, on the black part of this. It's like a pie chart. It's a strange type of yin yang. And you can see in the middle of the picture, there's all the manifested colors, because the different ratios of these 3, like I said, form, permeate consciousness and permeate the subtle qualities of all beings and all life form. So there's a formlessness to these more so than the elements, which is why we have to talk about them. We're used to talking about elements like fire, water, earth. Those are elements, but the grandparents of the elements are these qualities, these modes. So the last one is tamas, which is inertia and ignorance, and it's arguably one of the most important, because it's out of darkness that consciousness emerges, and it's Shakti being unaware of herself, the goddess, right? She's unaware of herself, moving through action to find Shiva, finding him, and reaching a mode of sattva. There are many ways to describe this, and it's kind of hard to illustrate, but tamas is the action that we take whenever we are obligated to do so. So it kind of has an ignorant quality to it, right? Because if I'm in pain and I become a spiritual seeker, I'm only inspired because I need to remove myself from pain. I'm depressed, I'm in agony. You know, if I have a broken arm and I go to the hospital, I'm propelled by pain and obligation to do so. It's not from inspiration. I mean, you could say you're inspired if you want to from a broken arm, but more so it's you're obligated to do so because your whole life is kind of put on hold until you can get over this pain threshold. Much like how you have to kick a mule to go, you know, the mule is only obligated, the mule will only go so long as he's being kicked. And so it's kind of a mode of ignorance. This is the yin yang symbol, which is, you know, this is more to do with the elements in the Tai Chi, in my opinion, than the Wu Chi, because you can see that the main ones are the polarities. You have sattva on one side, the mode of lightness, and then the mode of darkness, the mode of clarity and the mode of cloudy. Clarity, cloudy. And in between, you have the mode of transformation, and it's the transformative axis. That's rajas, which means, we'll look at what they mean specifically, but rajas basically reconciles the two, sattva and tamas. You know, this is another image too. We can see the border between them. It's just as important, right? The separating border is just as important as these two polar modes of darkness and lightness. And you can see that in darkness, in this symbol, you know, there's lightness in the dark and there's dark in the lightness. And they, that's why there's illusion, right? Because there's a stability in darkness too. That's also an important point I was going to make. Because tamas and ignorance is stable, all manifested reality emerges out of darkness. This is kind of well, first of all, a lot of this is in Italian, and that's because whatever, we're not English centric, but nonetheless I translated it. This is kind of a Hermetic alchemical perspective on sattva, rajas, and tamas. This is for people who are interested in alchemy, but sattva is sulfur, rajas is mercury, and tamas is salt. And basically sattva represents expansion, evaporation, and dissolution. So as such, it's not necessarily harmonious for life because it's about moving from matter to subtlety from no matter. Rajas is the integral, there in the middle, it's the integral force, the dynamic equilibrium, right? It's not just a static equilibrium. There's always a changing between sattva and tamas. And it's rajas, that is that line, that purple line between. And as such, it's always fluctuating. So there's a quality of circulation and digestion and perception. So rajas is the quality that allows us to, when we interact with the daily things in our world, it allows us to interpret meaning and to perceive things, you know? And then tamas represents contraction, condensation, and crystallization. So which is also very important for having a physical body, right? And as such, it represents sale, the more stable axis. So zolfo, mercurio, sale. You know, here's another graph to kind of show different qualities of sattva and how they manifest in material, you know, matter. We have, and this is in French, of course. And harmony, knowledge, beauty, calm, and satisfaction. That's sattva. Rajas is change, transformation, movement, and ego. Tamas is attachment, materialism, rigidity. Sommeil. Sommeil means fatigue or tiredness, and froideur, which means kind of like a coldness. So you have if we look at it as a plant, you know, the darkness of the earth gives the stable, nutritious groundwork, literally groundwork for the roots to hold on to, that it can then grow up out of, which is rajas, and support itself and stand up on its own and moves towards the sun, towards sattva. You know, plants grow towards light. You know, the roots grow up towards the sun And in the same way, our consciousness could be described here. Tamas is our lower centers, our sex centers, our animal instinct, our muladhara, all the way up to all the way up the chakra system of the nadi, up to the higher consciousness of sattva, which is the flowering, right? And consciousness in Indian thought is always thought of like a lotus flower or a blooming or an unfolding, right? We're not just born, a flower doesn't grow bloomed. It has to grow from a seed and go through all of this hardship and all of this growth and all of this changing and all of this yearning and pining and reaching and difficulties and rains and storms and animals, all of these things. So the fact that a flower can even bloom is a miraculous feat in and of itself. These are more graphs to kind of describe what they mean in a conscious sense, these qualities. And I'm harping so much on sattva, rajas, and tamas because they are essential. And in terms of the mental or human evolution, tamas, which is darkness, is inactive with the mind. It's our subconscious, the things that we're not working with, we're not acknowledging, we don't see, we don't understand about ourselves, our impulsive, or actually, it's not even impulsive, that would be more rajas. It's not even able to be impulsive because it's not even conscious enough for us to be reactive. And outside, it's inactive, so we don't see it. Varna, you don't have to worry about that. That's kind of this is important for a certain layer of psychology, but we're not going to get into it right now. Basically, it's just talking about different roles or different castes or different roles they play in our life. Tamoguna gives us endurance to do daily routine and the daily grind and stuff like that. Rajas, that middle axis, is active within our mind, right? We think, we perceive, our mind is whirring like an engine, like a machine. And there's action that comes out of that. That's either, selfish, where we want to gain money and only improve our own life and our own limited temporary self from ahamkara. Or we have like the unselfish action, which is kind of like the warrior class, right? The merchant class is selfish, right? All you want to do is make money and support your family and grow your business. The unselfish is the warrior who defends his country. It's like nationalism, but it's still rajasic, right? It's still fiery. It's still impulsive. It's still in the state of illusion, right? Because warriors are fighting battles with each other when really it's just Vishnu fighting Vishnu, right? Again, there's that inability to see that all is Vishnu, all is God, all is all is happening as a result of from this kind of divine plan, you could say. And we're not going to get into fate, but we're just going to get into the qualities of sattva, which is active within the mind. It's something that's blooming and growing, but it doesn't manifest into outside action, right? So it's something that's internal. And this is the spiritual seeker, the brahmana, the priestly caste, right? Whose goals are to just develop consciousness. They're inactive in the world. And as such, you don't see people who are sattvic running for political office. Why is that, do you think? Well, because it's inactive. They don't have they know that it would make no sense to rule other people because there is no concept of the other. Everything, all is one, right? There's this ecstasy of Shiva meeting Shakti, that ecstasy of uniting the yin and the yang, the feminine with, the receptive with the active. These qualities come together and there's ecstasy in that. So all worldly desire falls away. And worldly desire comes from tamaguna or rajoguna. So in sattva, the body serves the mind and the mind serves spirit. So the spirit is leading the life. In rajas, that kind of, that active kind of illusory quality of consciousness, the body serves the mind, but the mind serves itself. And we end up in a loop here of desire and suffering in that way, because the spiritual quality can't perceive the oneness and its action. You believe that you succeed when when your business does, extra well this quarter, you think that you did it, but you don't understand the rule of spirit. That's a rajas person. Now, a tamas person, like I said, kicking a mule, right? The mind serves the body. So, you only want to do things that your body want to do. You only want to eat, sleep, drink, have sex, right? You get caught up in addictions. You get caught up into the world of ignorance, and there isn't really much illumination into your action. There's no faith or real sense of purpose. And that's kind of like a mode of ignorance or darkness. Now, this is all highly philosophical, I realize that. But, we can move through these modes at any stage of our life or our development. We can move in and out of tamas, rajas, and sattva. But ideally, we are moving in that direction. And there's a purpose for tamas. I don't want to say that anyone is better than the other, because that's not true. Sometimes tamas remedies things that are rajasic. Sometimes tamas can remedy things that are sattvic, right? It's just knowing where you are at or where someone is at in this subtle quality. Now, to apply that to the yuga, there's a concept of the different ages of human civilization. Satya Yuga, the state of enlightenment, of truth, the age of truth. Sattva only. It's communities of only a sattvic quality, where everyone is this priestly kind of it's like a community of meditators. Everyone is trying to develop consciousness. Then you have Treta Yuga, then you start having the split of the three. Now all of the modes are present, with Sattva still being on top, the mode Rajas in the middle, and Tamas. So this is still a pretty balanced Yuga, but because all the forces are in alignment and in order. But then you have Dvapara Yuga, which is the Rajas on top, so it kind of favors action. And in the last Yuga, which we're in Kali Yuga, ignorance and darkness reign supreme, and Sattva and clarity is on the bottom. So, and then the transition between these yugas typically can be kind of more unstable. And certainly in this one, from Kali to Satya, I believe that there's the concept of catastrophic annihilation by Shiva. When Shiva awakens and he takes on his form as Nataraj and annihilates the universe. And then we begin again, back to Sattva. Annihilation is, the fate of destruction is the joy of rebirth. So, because we're in the age of tamas and darkness, we're really fighting an uphill battle. And so astrology really, really does become an important quality, right? Because we want to use and literally the sky is dark. So when we look into the darkness, we can develop the darkness by finding patterns and things like that. So here is the yoga evolution of Prakriti, which is, the Prakriti being the feminine principle. Now this is a lot of Sankhya philosophy, and kind of in a kind of difficult to digest graph, but we're just going to kind of take a chunk from it. And we're going to talk about Rajas, Tamas, and Sattva. So we have, the Mula Prakriti, the total balance of Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. That's before anything, that's the Wu Qi in Chinese thought, when everything was balanced and there was no life. There was no space, there was no planets, there was no nothing. It's Alinga Pradhana, without mark or demarcation. Linga means the demarcating factor. It's the thing that you can signify or differentiate between one thing or the other. That's why the male sex organ is called lingam, because it's easy to see on an animal if he's male, if he has an erection. It's a linga, it's a mark. But in Mula Prakriti, there is no markers. There's no way to discern Shiva from Shakti. They're in a total state of dormance. It's total state of unmanifestation, you can see here. Now we go across this as there's a disturbance in the balance. And now Rajas and Tamas and Sattva are not equal, and we have Mahat, this cosmic intelligence, that are universal intelligence, where that kind of gives birth to individual consciousness, individual intelligence, the I, the self, and the mind. So this is, it goes from the non-dual to the dual, or the triplicity, and then into different states of individuality. So from tamas, from this darkness, this mode of darkness, we have the sense objects that arise, the subtle elements, or avishesha, which are universal, right? They're not specific to us, right? They're just sounds, touch, form, taste, and smell. And they're not interacting with anybody's senses. They're just out there in the universe. I mean, they do interact, but because all of these are in harmony, but we have to look at them and dissect them separately. The tanmatra are these subtle elements. They interact with the gross elements, and they come from the Tanmatra, the Mahabhuta. Bhuta means truth, which is kind of, well, what that means is, how do I describe this? Well, it's how we perceive the truth is through these elements, and whether, it's illusory, but still we engage with the elements because they give us information, and this information is how we move through the world. Then from this manasic side of things that are more sattvic, so tamas gives us the elements, space, air, fire, water, and earth, which are raw elements that create all things and in all combinations. Manas, the mind, which is not avishesha, not universal, they are very personal. Right? We have the Jananendriya, which are the organs of perception: ears, skin, eyes, tongue, and nose, our five senses. They are tools that we use. When you're in a dark hallway, you're running your hand along the wall. Out of darkness, your hand is the sense. The darkness is the tanmatra is the darkness. The wall is the mahabhuta, and the organ of action is your movement in the karmendriya. So from our senses, we get mouth, arms, legs, excretory system, and reproductive system. So to say this in another way, what I to review what I just said, because you have to keep saying it to get it. The tanmatras interact with the organ of the senses through the agency of the organs of action to bring about the experience of creation to satisfy the desires of the heart, allowing for spiritual development and expansion of consciousness. So for Shakti to reach her Shiva, all of this process, all of these things come about, all of this illusory world, this world that we live in, this Maya, this whole illusion comes up because of this quest. And, which came first, the chicken or the egg, right? Did the sound come first, or did my ears come first? Well, they arise together. Because there are my ears, there is also sound. And because there's sound, I have a voice, and my voice travels through space and air. So there's this, you can zoom in and out of the different levels of the evolution of Prakriti, of the goddess. And that is why all is goddess. The potential to hear sounds creates space, giving us our voice. The potential to feel texture or tangibility creates wind, which gives us dexterity in our hands. The potential to see color and form creates fire, which gives us motion. The potential to taste savors or flavors creates water, which gives us reproductive ability. And the potential to smell odors creates the earth element, giving us our ability to excrete waste. So it's a very full and complete philosophy, to say the least. It's genius. So the five elements, now we're going to look at them, the Panchatattva. And the Panchatattva, well, that means Pancha means five and Tattva means true essence. And the Panchatattvas are the five primordial causes of all that is created. And this is according to Surya Siddhanta, we assign the different planets or, to the different elements. Before we begin that, we're just going to talk about the elements. Ether and space is the house of the self. It's the emptiness that allows for all things, life force, and potential energy. And it gives us the possibility for our senses to experience in the first place. Right? The universe, the multiverse is expanding, or whatever theory you want to use. It's expanding. They've proved it. And that emptiness allows, for air, which is moving and changing. Its qualities are separating and dispersing. It vitalizes the sense organs. It is everywhere and acts like the nervous systems. It carries the substances to the senses. So it's like the carrier aspect of emptiness, right? So from emptiness, we have this movement. right? From the empty space, we have the propulsion in a direction. We get directions in space, and we can orient ourselves in space. You know, if you're in empty space and there's no light or objects, you can't tell what's up from down. You can't tell left from right. You can't tell good from bad. You can't feel anything. There's nothing to feel. Your senses can't interact with anything. Well, once you start getting movement, you start getting light and illumination, which digests the senses delivered to the self. It matures and ripens our desires and passions. It gives us hunger and thirst and biological needs and enzymatic processes. There's all these there's a lot of medical importance to our bodily fires. It's hot and dry. So then you have water, which is cohesive and the nourishing force, and it's one that assimilates the digested nutrients from fire to give satisfaction. Then you have the earth, which is the foundation of life, and it holds all of these life forces and gives us different species and different types of rocks and trees and different types of metals and gems. It brings the subtle to the gross manifested reality, right? So you have totally unmanifested nothingness to totally manifested real, you know, I can move this, I can pick it up. So these senses, sattva, you know, if we break down this process into sattva, rajas, and tamas, the sattvic quality of this illusion is the jnanendriya, which is the organs of knowledge. So Jupiter is represented by the ether element, which rules hearing, and he gains knowledge from sound. And we literally say in English, hey, that sounds good to me. And that's when Jupiter, is trying to discern or trying to confirm information. Hey, that sounds right. That sounds about right. Right? We literally say that. Air is Saturn, which is touch, and it's kind of knowledge from tangibility. And that, when we encounter something difficult in our lives, we say, life is hard. Gosh, that was so, we use a tactile word to describe it. And fire is represented by Mars, who is sight, and he gives us knowledge from form and color. And when we encounter an accident or an accident happens to us, we say, "Oh shit, I didn't see that coming. I didn't see it coming. I didn't acquire knowledge from sight to overcome this difficulty." I think you get it. Water is Venus, which is taste, and we get Venus gets information from flavors and the water element. And our saliva, which is wet. And, that's has to do with Venusian things, which is all about aesthetic and arts, right? And our sense of artistic self. She says, hey, you have good taste. Earth is Mercury and it smells. And knowledge is from the olfactory senses with its chemoreceptors, chemicals information. And there's lots of different chemicals on Earth, because Mercury rules differentiation. He rules the periodic table, right? It's all these different combinations of atoms, protons, neutrons, electrons, all these different ratios in this differentiation. When he's, because Mercury is primarily, when he's trying to learn something or gain knowledge, which is very mercurial, you say, and something doesn't add up, you say, something smells funny. And that's it's kind of like an interesting concept, I guess. So there's also astral senses, which are a little different. They are our clairaudience. They're kind of our psychic senses. Clairaudience, palpitation, clairvoyance, psychic taste, psychic noise. So there's psychic qualities. So the rajas thing emerging out of the rajasic quality coming from this illusory world we're in, or the karmendriya. So ether is Jupiter, like we described, and he rules sound. But he gives us the action of vocalization. He allows us to speak our truths. Saturn gives us dexterity and manual skill, because Saturn represents like work and being able to provide for ourselves and doing things. Service in whatever way, or whatever. Fire is Mars. Through his sight, we're able to see and then move through space. When someone can't see with their eyes, they don't move as fast. They move in a different way. Their motion is changed, and as such, fire element is is the primary organ is the feet. Our motion, our feet allows us to move. Now, obviously, not everyone moves with our feet. Some people move. Some people live their lives in chairs, and we have all different types of motion that we do, but this is just a generalization, right? I know this is kind of ableist, some of these things that I might be saying. Water is Venus, and she kind of gives us, taste is a very important part of sex, the sexual waters, right? We exchange fluid bonding. We bond through our sexual fluids. And as such, water the water element allows us to generate, to regenerate, reproduce. And it's found in the sex organs, the lower lower chakra. Then you have Earth, Mercury, who smells. And the smelliest part of ourselves is excretion, our urine, our waste, our sweat, our poop. And that's primarily in our earth element is in the anus, or the Muladhara chakra, the root chakra, and which is very much tonified by, in yoga, you contract and release the anus, and that generates energy and chi because you're working with earth, the stability of the square. So, we get vocalization, dexterity, motion, generation, and excretion as a result of our senses. We get these superpowers in red. They're called the karmendriya. And that's kind of our rajasic quality, because we think that we're doing these things, but we're not. They're just doings. They're happenings that are a phenomenon. And going back a slide, knowledge in and of itself is a quality of sattva and truth. Through knowledge we come to know the truth, and through action we can interact with our world. And then, as you know, the last one is tamas, which is just the sensory objects themselves, right? So like sound, form, all the things you interact with, like the wall in that analogy I said. This is the generative cycle of the elements. Which comes first? Well, they think there's a story for how the elements come about, and that's certainly true, right? There's a chain event, a chain reaction of event that forms all the elements. And I've kind of made a wheel here. The vacuum of emptiness eventually creates movement through space, which causes friction and heat, which melts molecules into a liquid state, which crystallizes them into solids. Bam, that's easy. But, if one of the planets is weak, then it will disturb the whole cycle. Now, ether, another way to say it is, in terms of life force, is ether provides the housing for the life force, which vitalizes the senses to the nervous system via air and touch. The life force matures via our perception via fire, which is maintained and cohered into form, which is earth. So the maintenance of life is water, and the differentiation of life is earth. And so we got all these plants and different species and animals. Now, the psychological layer of that is, if Jupiter is weak and we have a lack of faith, purpose, and meaning, then a disturbed Saturn is misguided and has a poor sense of duty, right? Without purpose, our duty becomes misguided. And if Saturn is weak and we have a poor duty or pessimism or focusing on lack and what we don't have, then our Mars is disturbed and we have many desires, we squander our energy, we are angry, and we are forced to dominate others because we are so lacking. Now, if Mars is weak and we don't have any discipline, we're angry at the world, we're restless and undeveloped, the result is the disturbed Venus in our life will not be satisfied or nourished. Do you see what I'm doing here, guys? If one is disturbed, it can mess up the whole chain, right? If Venus is disturbed, she affects Mars. If Mars is disturbed, it affects Saturn. If Saturn is disturbed, it affects Jupiter. So continuing on, if Venus is weak, thirsty Venus becomes lustful for sense objects, addictions, and distractions. So then Mercury is affected and is unaccomplished, and his security is destroyed by wastefulness. And if Mercury is weak, the lack of management, futility, and troubled by details will disturb Jupiter, and Jupiter is unable to find purpose, meaning, and philosophy because of disorganization, right? So, what about the opposite? What if they're strong? Well, if Jupiter is strong and you have a good sense of purpose, then Saturn can fulfill his duties without negativity. If Saturn is strong and healthy and there's a good sense of detachment and patience, then Mars won't be so domineering and he'll act with patience, logic, and clarity, and he'll be peaceful. And if that peaceful Mars with good willpower and who's developing good character, um, then Venus, and that will create a comfortable Venus who is nourished and provided for, and she gets to enjoy all of her senses internally and externally because she's got a good sense of character and she's got a good balance in the way she enjoys her senses. And because of that, she's easily content and her senses are undisturbed. Well, an undisturbed Venus creates an accomplished Mercury who gives an incentive in his tasks. He's realistic in his needs, and his needs are easily met, right? If you can't please somebody with no matter what you do, uh, nothing in life is going to ever, you'll just be wandering the earth. You'll be cursed to wander. There's lots of stories about that, right? If Mercury is strong, a person is organized and efficient, right? I'm organized what I want. What I want and what I don't want. I'm moving in an efficient way. Then the facilitated Jupiter is able to zoom out and focus on the big picture and find his place or purpose. And we go all the way back to the beginning. So Jupiter helps Saturn, which helps Mars, which helps Venus, which helps Mercury, which helps Jupiter. So our goal, whenever we do a medical astrology or we're working with whatever form of magic, alchemy in general, it's important to know what elements we're working on. And if we're working with clients, you have to get good at this layer of astrology, which is seeing through to the elemental layers. Now, we also have a degenerative cycle, and I was kind of accidentally talked about that earlier, where you go backwards. But the process is reversed, and earth is dissolved by water. Water is evaporated by fire. Fire is blown out by wind, and wind is stilled by ether, right? Wind can't travel forever in empty space, right? There's a stillness in space. There's no wind in space, literally. And there's no sound in space. Why is there no sound? Because there's no air. So this is the system of checks and balances. Ether lets air move and dissipate. Wind, so it creates and destroys, right? Ether creates wind and also can dissipate it or control it. It's kind of like a control cycle is what we literally call this in the Chinese way. And that's when you're prescribing herbs and things like that. You have to know what element is out of control in the body and how to control it. Well, ether lets air move and dissipate. Wind or air gives fuel to fire, but it can also extinguish it, just like when you blow a fire out, or you blow a candle out, rather. Now, fire distills and evaporates water. Fire can melt things down into liquid states or reduce things into a watery state, but it can also evaporate fire and boil it. And water coheres and can condense and erode things and make sedimentary rock and things like that. It can dissolve earth too, right? Just as much as it can cohere it into something else. So whether, either direction you're going, you're generating the other elements or you're controlling them and degenerating them. Well, there's a psychological layer to this. This one's a little bit faster. I didn't do 2 slides. So Mercury's need for accomplishment, perfection, and organization is checked by Venus's capacity to feel satiated, content, and enraptured, which avoids overwork, overproduction, mental exhaustion, and alienation. Got it? So when Venus's need to feel satiated and comfortable is checked by Mars, who finds happiness and discipline, strength, and solutions and action, then you don't get a Venus who's complacent, addiction, inactive, and excessive. Now when Mars's need for action, self-promotion, pride, and leadership is checked by Saturn's, right? Because this is a system of checks and balances. When Mars is checked by Saturn's skepticism and practicality, then you don't get a Mars who's arrogant, who's constantly going back and forth, overstraining, overestimating, overpromoting, domineering. And then Saturn, by the same token, his need for humility, structure, and rigidity is checked by Jupiter's ability to forgive, to zoom out, and see the big picture, right? To understand and to philosophize. And that kind of avoids Saturn's propensity for self-abnegation, denial, malnutrition of the body and spirit, and like self-destruction, self-sabotage, self-hatred, self-loathing, whatever. All of these things that kind of can happen with Saturn. Now, similarly, Jupiter's need for meaning and purpose can be checked by Mercury's ability to accomplish things, organize details, find worth in philosophy and action. So that way you don't get a Jupiter that's fanatic, extravagant, and oversightful, right? So just because, in astrology we have planets that are good or bad, whatever that means, cruel or soft, cruel or gentle, well, they all can have a lower and a higher quality. And Jupiter is no exception. Even though he's seen as the greater benefic, Jupiter sometimes doesn't want to be bothered with details. And so when it's checked by Mercury's ability to actually organize details, you avoid that Jupiterian oversight, which is actually a really huge, or over-exaggeration, right? Jupiter can over-exaggerate and say things that aren't necessarily lies, but they're not necessarily true. Now, there's a sense of dynamic harmony here in the elements, and they're constantly changing and fluctuating in the body, right? Like if I have a fever, my fire element's up. If I'm swelling in my legs, my water element may be up if it's a water swelling. Balance is healthy and all else is disease, right? Because we have systems of excess and deficiency, and this is really important for medical astrology or Eastern medicine, or because we're using an energetic system. The reason I'm even wasting my breath here and talking to you people about these elements is because we need the elements to be better at medical diagnostics. The Western physicians don't use an energetic system necessarily. They use drug actions a lot. Like this is an anti-febrile agent. This is an anti-spasmodic. This, anti, this fights that, this controls that. And those are all actions, but they're not talking about elements, which is kind of huge because they're not zooming out a step. And if you don't zoom out that final step and move from drug action to drug element, or the element of diagnostic elements, you really are missing out, and you're not going to be a good doctor. That's just the way it is. I don't care who you are or how long you've been practicing. If you don't have an energetic system, your opinion is pretty much worthless to me. Excess ether, first of all, an element taken to the extreme destroys the very element that creates it. Chinese medicine has understood this forever, and so does Ayurveda. So what does that mean? Well, when you have too much emptiness, Earth is destroyed by the expansion and vacuum of space, right? The vacuum of space can destroy worlds. Excess air, ether, the emptiness of the previous element, loses its supportive stillness and chaos reigns, right? It's like the surface of Jupiter. Or not, well, you can't really say, who even knows what Jupiter's surface looks like? All we can see is the gaseous atmosphere. It's just chaotic storms. There's no, the ether element has lost its supportive stillness. So that's kind of hard. That one's kind of harder to understand. That one's really, subtle, right? Because we're moving from the subtle elements, ether and air. They're harder to describe. But excess fire is easier to understand, right? Because, when you put a cup over a candle, what happens? The fire goes out. That's because the air is consumed and polluted, right? And the fuel is burnt up and out. There's an excess of fire which destroys the very element that creates it. So excess water, that means the fire is extinguished. Duh, that one's easy. Excess earth, well, there's too much dryness, and earth absorbs water and drought. And as such, when you destroy your generative element, you destroy yourself, right? So, ether destroying earth also destroys ether. Excess ether also destroys itself because earth can't hold, there's no way to hold space. There's no way to tell space from non-space. Air destroys itself when it's in excess because wind cancels itself out. Excess fire, the air is consumed and polluted, but also that means the fire goes out. Right? It consumes the fire and then extinguishes itself. This is a very, in a lot of diseases, this happens, right? Like if I have excess fever, that can mess up the wind system in my body, which in turn shuts off the digestive fire in the body, and I can't eat food. Like when you have a high fever, are you hungry? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. You should not feed a fever because you're not hungry in the first place. You can't digest anything because the excess rampant energy is destroying its generative element and destroying itself. Please, please, please understand this. If you understand this, you can zoom into any disease and you've got prodromal symptoms, you got pre-symptoms, common symptoms, and then late stage symptoms. You can look at a stage of an illness and decide how far along the elements are basically imbalanced. Excess earth creates that dryness. So the earth absorbs all the water. Well, without water, there's no life. There's no differentiation of life. And life becomes a big desert. Earth destroys earth. It just becomes a wasteland. It also has a psychological layer. I know this is a lot, but stick with me, guys. Excess is the psychological layer is, Jupiter, when he has unrealistic, excessive expectations and faith, he destroys the need for details and affairs who become managed in a fanatic or a vague or a sloppy way. And upon this mismanagement, no purpose of Jupiter can be furthered or explained. Right? I can't spread my philosophy if I won't go into detail with people, if I won't meet people and notice that people are all different and there's no one philosophy that fits everyone. That's stupid. That's why religious dogma destroys lives and destroys nations and destroys entire populations of people. Because you have to engage in your affairs in a way that is comprehensive, right? We are... we also have we see people with excessive Saturn, and there's a sense of over-concentration. You've got your head in the sand like an ostrich. You've got this pessimistic, dogmatic way of life that destroys your philosophy, and you can't zoom out, you can't see the big picture, and it makes all of the stuff you're working for meaningless and directionless anyway, right? Saturn destroys himself by his own dogmatic pessimism. So Mars's excess is overpowering, and that need to get to the finish line, I need to finish, I need to do, this is my goal, this is my purpose in life, that can be really an overzealous cult leader. He becomes toxic and too self-important, and it destroys Saturn's ability to do the daily work, the details that are deemed unimportant for I can't do that work. I'm doing this important mission. Well, if you're not developing your character through these grinding daily work, then Mars suffers and Mars destroys himself. Venus's excess is similar in that the overindulgence and pampering of Venus and over-delighting one's senses, overeating, over-intake, too much stimulus, it destroys your ability to direct your own life. You can't keep your eyes on the prize because you've got too many distractions of worldly pleasures. And as such, if you're fulfilled by everything, you're fulfilled by nothing. If you don't stand up for something, you'll fall for anything. Isn't that what Malcolm X said? You've got to stand up and come out of your complacency, right? He was talking about racism in that sense where, in the presence of a negative peace, right? The liberal moderate, there's a sense of negative peace. It'll prevent you from actually seeking out an active justice. You become complacent. I see this. This is one of the ones I see all the time, and I certainly have issues with Venus and Mercury excess. So Venus can't even make money or provide the things she wants because she has her Mars is destroyed. So if I want a Lamborghini, but I won't get up off my butt to go work because I'm too busy dreaming about my Lamborghini, well, you're never going to have one. Mercury's excess is over-focused on stability, security, frugality, and the details, and it destroys Venus's feeling of being able to comfort herself or feel pleasure. And the pleasures that require expenditure, right? You don't want to spend your money. You're too into the earth element. You're hoarding. You're like hoarders. Look at hoarders. They can't even enjoy any of their objects because their objects are rotting in the basement. Oh, don't throw that out. You're keeping this trash bag because you need this trash to rot in your look. I saw a woman, I walked into a woman's house who was a hoarder, and it was one of the most intense things I have ever seen. Her Mercury was, she was so excessive and so out of balance. This psychological layer was You know, it was actually making her physically ill because there was like presence of methane gases in her house from rotting trash. Can you imagine? Now, this prevents happiness because, you know, Mercury can't organize all this shit. Um, Deficiency is the opposite of excess. And deficiency can be just as deadly and destructive as, and I think it's a lot more complicated medically. A deficient element can be harder to diagnose for something that's called the insulting cycle. What's the insulting cycle? Well, first of all, a scarce element makes its generating element excessive or aggravated, right? If, you know, there's a, you know, if there's deficient ether, then Earth is going to increase to try to make up for the deficit. The deficit of air will cause ether to go out of balance. The deficit of fire creates excess air. You know, there's a sense of aggravation, you know. But the thing about it is, like, when a deficient element causes its generating element to become excessive, the generating element will eventually become a source of harm to the deficient element. So not only is a deficient element harmed by its own weakness, it's harmed by its generating element. And this is known as the insulting cycle. Now, well, that's kind of hard to understand. You probably need to reread the slide over and over again until you get it. Deficiency is really difficult to see in a client and in a chart. And psychological layer, physical layer, spiritual layers, all of these elements permeate the different layers. So let's look at the planets again, the psychological layer. So a Jupiter deficiency means a lack of purpose or acceptance causes too much emphasis on material gain or accomplishment. So Mercury becomes insulting towards idealism, religion, spirituality, or outward seeking of truth, right? Because Jupiter is weak, Mercury has to take up the slack. And Mercury says, well, I don't believe in God, I believe in money. And I hate everyone who's a religious person. There is no religion, right? Well, that's right. Well, everyone has a spiritual side, and if you don't develop it, your life is missing 90% of the purpose on your life. You're just a billionaire in Russia who steals food from hundreds of thousands of people, like so many Russian oligarchs do. Fucking Putin. Saturn air deficiency. You know, there's a lack of detachment or healthy skepticism or fear, which causes a tendency for over hopefulness and lack of action. So what does that mean? Well, Jupiter ether will then have to be insulting and critical towards one's progress and capacity, and it kind of has a know-it-all complacency. So the fire deficiency causes someone to be not motivated. You are not action oriented. You can't progress. You're lazy and inactive. So Saturn and air becomes insulting towards inspiration or social movements. You are critical of people who are doing things with their lives because your Mars is deficient, right? You're insulting towards inspiration itself and towards the creative active principle of the psyche. Venus and water deficiency cause a lack of nourishment or fulfillment. It causes too much hunger and need. If you're hungry, it overrides all, if you're starving to death, it overrides all your other needs. So then Mars and fire can become insulting towards comforts, pleasure, or relaxation. And this is where we see workaholics, right? You know, if I can't be satisfied, I'm going to insult people who are getting satisfaction, who are satisfied with their lives. And I won't be someone who is easily nourished because my water is deficient. If Mercury or Earth is deficient, there's a lack of security, accomplishment, discernment, which causes excess desire for emotional fulfillment and pleasure. And it's kind of in a haphazard, dangerous way, right? Venus or water will then have an insulting attitude towards material success while expecting pleasures from ungrounded and unsustainable sources. So, yeah, this one's kind of huge too. This is actually one of the most common ones I see. You know, almost everyone I feel like they have an earth deficiency. Also because our planet Earth is in utter agony. Well, I can't speak for the earth, but and you know, we're in agony because of the way we're treating Earth, right? We're insulting towards towards the water element of Earth, towards the waters in the Earth, right? Because of our Jupiter deficiency and our Mercury deficiency. So as a collective human race, we need to tonify our Jupiter and our Mercury deficiency. We need a greater collective spiritual purpose, and we need the organization and the know-how and the security and the accomplishment to do that. All the rest could be skipped. If we could just get our water, if we just could get our earth and our ether balanced, we could fix this deficient cycle of earth and water. And it's kind of hard to understand, but it actually isn't if you meditate on it. Sometimes these words don't really work. This has got in medical astrology, there's something called a life promoting cycle. Ether provides. So this is kind of what we were talking about in our, in the generative cycle, right? Ether, air, fire, water, earth. Well, we've got another type of cycle. This is the third and last one. Which is air or ether. It promotes fire, fire promotes earth promotes air, and air promotes water, and water again goes back and promotes ether. And we can see this in the cycle of condensation of the waters into heavens and the rain. We can see this in the fires and volcanoes. We see evidence of this life promoting cycle all around us, right? Absolutely. And the psychological area of that is if Saturn is fearful, Mercury, which is Earth, Mercury must provide greater security. If Venus is unfulfilled, then Saturn must provide perseverance. If Jupiter is hopeless, Venus must provide comfort and nourishment to overcome that sense of lack, or that sense of directionless, meaninglessness. If Mars is slow to exert, then Jupiter must provide acceptance and understanding and more luck and more opportunities. And maybe the guru, he has to provide a guru, a teacher, a spiritual teacher to, instigate or propel Mars to get up and improve himself and improve his life condition, right? Quit whining and do something. If Mercury is inefficient, Mars must provide energy to combat the difficulties, right? That inefficiency and that disorganization of the earth element, or that, fire has to make up for that. Fire actually, the molten lava, right? That's called igneous rocks. That fire and molten volcano creates earth. Volcanoes create earth. So we're coming to an end here on this presentation. Stay with me. So the interactions of the three cycles. I love this kind of thing, this principle of alchemy. If we do 25%, God will do the rest. If we do 25%, God will do the rest, the key to alchemy. Why is that? Because if you just focus on one element, you can affect 3 elements. So basically, we have the generative cycle, like we talked about, how that circle is going in a circle. Then you go the opposite direction. Then you have the life-promoting cycle, which was here. So an afflicted or a weak element or planet can affect any and all cycles. I should say any. Similarly, emphasizing any element through training, focus of will, meditation, gyms, diet, herbs, exercises, Ayurveda, it'll have an effect on the other elements, right? So here's an example, because this is we're really, really taking a chunk here and applying it to see if you've got it. So strengthening the water element in Venus as a planet through self-beautification and nourishing foods will affect what? What will it affect? The generative cycle. Well, what creates, what comes after water? Earth. What comes before water? Fire. What's the life supporting? Ether. So Venus supports ether. Venus supports Jupiter. Water supports Jupiter. This axis is represented. So we've got Earth and Mercury is increased. If we increase water, then we increase Earth and Mercury, which uh, will help us manage our affairs more effectively and be more emotionally grounded to do good work. Fire and Mars will be controlled through the degenerative cycle, right? Because water extinguishes fire and controls fire. Fire will be controlled through the dissolution cycle. So hunger, anger, domineering behaviors will not arise. There won't be that anger and that intensity. There'll be a softness to the personality. Mars will be soft. Now, Ether and Jupiter will be promoted, and one will feel very optimistic, hopeful, and happy. All of this because we just tonify one element. And that's why if we do 25%, God will do the rest. Now, how do you know what kind of person someone is? What are their dominant elements? Well, according to Brihat Parashara Horashastra, we have different kind of peoples, and different people will go through different elements in their lives depending on what elements their dasha is running, or what element the planet of the dasha is that they're running. If you don't know what dashas are, you should study Jyotish. You'll see that in one of my next lectures. Basically, a fiery person is someone who is disturbed by hunger. They usually have intense hunger. They're moving to and fro, frenetic. They're highly intelligent. They're heroic. They're lean because their metabolism is so high. They're sharp, quick, fair body, light sensitive, and is opinionated. They're also prone to anger, which it doesn't say that, but I'm going to say that. What happens when we're going through a fire period of our life? This just describes a fiery person. Well, I'm going to read from Ernst Wilhelm's book. He's saying that the fire element gives us the ability to shine like gold, to appear auspicious, to accomplish all affairs that we are engaged in. We will be victorious in acquiring when the brilliance of fire is brought forth. So wow, how many people do we know who need a good fire boost? Earth element is someone who is of the nature of, who is spiritual, who enjoys things thoroughly, who is firm, happy, strong, and patient, who's sought after for advice, though timid of speech, right? So they don't say much, but when they do say something, people listen. They like to work outside, and they have a worldly perspective. And when you're in an Earth period, or when you're astrologically in an Earth and Time Lord period, which is, Mercury, in your Mercury period, you're going to have, and fire can be the sun. It can also be Mars, right? Now, the reason we haven't talked, going back to fire, the reason we haven't talked about the sun or the moon yet is because the sun and the moon are the planets that do the experiencing, right? They rule the upper levels of the consciousness, the intelligence, the Atma, the Jiva, the consciousness, and the individual consciousness, the cosmic self and the individual self. Cosmic self is sun, individual self is moon. So as such, they're not given an element. Got it? Well, we talked about Earth. So this is Mercury, right? We got Mars and Sun. Mercury, and during his period, during Mercury's period, perhaps an agreeable scent to the body, glossiness of the nails and teeth, and acquiring righteously gained happiness when the earth luster is produced. Basically, that means it just helps you to bring about a period of overall strength. And your reservoir of energy will be strong. You'll experience happiness in all your affairs, right? Because Earth is everywhere you look on this planet. On this planet Earth. Ether element, which is Jupiter, this will be a Jupiterian person. They're going to have they're an ether dominant personality. They're going to be originating in, they're going to be, well, they will be original. The originality is one of the key signatures for a strong ether. They're going to have solutions to problems no one has ever thought of. They will be like an alien from a different planet because they're so true to themselves and they're so in touch with Source and God. They are wise in taking advantage from words. They're knowledgeable in policy and conduct. They're confident, joined with wisdom. They're expansive. They're usually tall and well built, and they have an undeniable inner happiness. Well, when you're in a dasha, when you're in a time lord period of Jupiter, or time period, planetary period of Jupiter, the clear luster of ether is brought forth. Eloquence is produced, and by listening to and learning that which sounds well, happiness is brought forth. So it's all about the expansion of the self. So you really, really will expand in a planetary period of Jupiter. You will understand the truth better. Yeah, and and these are kind of the good concepts. Water is lovely, soft, burden-bearing, affectionate speech, lord of the earth with many friends, gentle and learned, right? That makes sense. Water is lovely and is the source of, our bodies are mostly water, right? So we get joys of the body. And during Venus's or during the moon's planetary period, right? Because we've got water is also represented by the moon, who's our individual consciousness. Soft and healthy in body when the luster of water is produced, happiness upon the finest desirable flavors and becoming slender. So basically your health will be regenerated and nourished. You'll recover from illness. Your body will repair itself. And, you'll have an overall sense of nourishment of all your senses. That's really good. If assuming your Venus is well situated. Air element, this is the last one. Basically, the person born with abundance of air is giving, quick-angered, fickle, changeable, roaming, a lord of the earth, thin, debating, and unable to be held back, because you can't stop the wind. I was born in Oklahoma, and if you've ever been in a tornado, you just can't. It's unstoppable, especially if they're a higher strength. Well, during a period of Saturn, who rules air, impurity, ignorance, degeneracy, depression, and disease when wind is produced, and then pain and burning, like a tornado, right? Air is very dispersing. And so the things we want to set up and collect and grow in our lives can be knocked over and knocked down, which makes room for new growth, but it inherently is kind of a violent process. So, Rahu also, the northern nodes can be here, or the north node and the south node. It can reveal your weaknesses and your inabilities. It's a very revealing time. It strips away the false, and that security blanket being ripped away by a high wind or a storm wind is can cause you to figure out how to be happy internally, or you're going to have to face depression. Well, that's the end of the slideshow, but why don't I do that? We're going to go from the start. I'm just going to go back up to this image so we can kind of full scale, right? Where were we? We just talked about the elements here. All of that was just from darkness, from tamas. All of these elements and all of these descriptive words I described come from this darkness. And that clarity we get from engaging with the elements and our senses and these different personality traits, and through using Ayurveda, or through using alchemy, or through using Chinese medicine, or through using Unani medicine, or through using the 9 key Japanese system, or macrobiotics, or whatever you're using, you can tonify the elements. That is the whole purpose. It doesn't matter which form you're practicing of medicine or astrology or magic, because what we're talking about here is a magical foundation. If you understand these elements, you can apply this to every realm of your life, because you're working with the goddess. You're working with Prakriti, which is our innate nature of ourselves. In Ayurveda, we have different constitutions, and different constitutions will need different medicines. There's different elemental types of fever. There's a watery kind of fever. There can be a fiery fever. It's so many so many complexities, the different variations we can get. Ultimately, what do we know what to do? Well, if an individual is unable to follow their inspirations, right, we know the fire element is weak. If they're unable to strengthen their body or get good nutrition or absorb what people are saying, or they can't strengthen themselves or fortify themselves, we know the earth element is weak. If we're unable to find happiness, we know Jupiter and ether is weak. If we're unable to heal from emotional or physical ills, we can't regenerate, that could also be a water thing. And if we can't withstand stress and we're depressed all the time, or illness or whatever, or we're easily knocked over, we need to tonify air. In the Chinese system, it's a little different in the sense that, there's no, earth is represented by earth, fire is represented by fire, water is represented by water in the Chinese system. But what's different is, in their system, air is metal and ether is wood. And I don't really like the Chinese elements. I don't think they make as much sense. I don't understand a system that doesn't include empty space. But of course, the Chinese elements are really useful for medical diagnostics, the wood and the metals of the body. Now that makes a lot of sense to me, but it kind of doesn't make sense for an overall cosmic picture. So I don't really use the Chinese elements for cosmic scale things because there aren't trees in space, right? Wood is relevant to Earth, right? To me, wood is Earth, and so is metal. Metal also comes from the Earth. So why are we making those two different things? That's my critique of it. Now, I may be ignorant, and I certainly am not an expert in Chinese medicine, but I will be soon once I go to TCM school after Ayurveda school. But from what I can tell, I think Ayurveda and this system of elements is far superior to the alchemical system, the Hermetics system that comes, from kind of like Egyptian thought, Hellenistic, Greek, these ancient magician types, right? I feel like if you stick with these elements, earth, fire, air, water, and space, you're going to have a lot more success working with your development of your consciousness and the development through the ages and the development of your mind, body, and spirit. You're going to know herbalism better. You're going to understand minerals better, and gold, and how to use gemstones and all this stuff better. You're going to understand just energetic principles better in general. And you're going to find the wholeness. You're going to be able to make yourself whole because you understand yourself. And that's with the help of our elements. So thank you to Kapila for giving me all this information, and Brihad Parashara, this compilation of astrological text. Thank you to Ernst Wilhelm for translating in his book, the Graha Sutras, Planets of Vedic Astrology. Definitely check him out. He's a genius. His translations are great. But thank you for your time. And again, go to astrovedicus.wordpress.com for readings, information, or more insight into astrology and magic. All right. Thank you, guys.